Well, next week, the Trudeau government tables its third federal budget, and gender equality is expected to be a major theme. In fact, it's believed the finance minister crafted this budget using a gender lens. It's what's known as gender-based analysis. So, how does that work? What does this tell us about what we might see in the budget? Well, joining me now is Jane Stinson, and she's a research associate with the Canadian Research Institute for the Advancement of Women and adjunct research professor at Carleton University. So you ought to know, for starters, if you can just help us with the basics, how do we define gender-based analysis? What does it mean?
I think it's whenever you analyze a policy or program trying to get at what are the different impacts for men and women. Most simply, that would be gender-based analysis.
So what role should it play in forming government policy?
It can be very revealing, particularly of differential impacts, right? Of a policy that may benefit, say, men much more than it benefits women. And even within that simple gender-based analysis, you should be adding a little bit more. Women are not a universal group, right? Lots of differences based on age, on income, whether you're an immigrant, whether you're Indigenous or not. So there's often gender-based analysis plus to sort of really get at the complexity and the nuances of what are the impacts on women of a policy or program.
So you're talking about not just looking at a subset of the population, but a subset, all the various subsets of that subset.
Of that majority of the population, yes.
Yes, the majority. I thought you'd mentioned that. The 2017 federal budget was hailed as starting to do this, right? It was supposed to include gender-based analysis. Did it? Did it succeed?
Well, two different questions for sure. It certainly did start to do a gender-based analysis, and that was a welcome step. But I don't know that it was really, it succeeded. When we did an analysis of that last budget, we called it baby steps. Welcome baby steps, right? It was the beginning. In fact, under like 20, 30 years ago, there used to be a much more robust program of gender-based analysis in the federal government. So they're sort of coming back to baby steps of what used to exist, where you actually look at a budget and say, okay, these are the gender impacts of this budget. But they didn't apply it to everything in the budget. They said certain things, we've done a gender-based analysis, or this is a gender-based analysis. But we would argue that it should be all of the budget that should have that sort of lens.
All right, so if that was baby steps, what about grown-up steps in the 2018 budget? What are you looking for? Give me some examples, concrete measures.
Well, a thorough analysis. I mean, I think the analysis is important, what it reveals about the impacts. And also, I think it has a public educational value. That's really important for us to understand why certain things are important or why certain things shouldn't happen. So a more robust gender-based analysis of a full budget, not just certain aspects. For example, infrastructure investment has been a big, and it's a very important thing the federal government does. It wasn't presented as a gender-based, with a gender-based analysis, and yet it's really important. One, often investment in infrastructure benefits men in terms of jobs. Are there any requirements that women should be hired into some of those construction jobs that are stimulated through infrastructure investment? That would be one question. And then the other question could be, well, there's a lot of privatization of infrastructure. Funding is increasingly through private mechanisms. What are the consequences of that for women? Because there's a lot of evidence that privatization of infrastructure is far more expensive. And that means that there's less money for other social programs, particularly health, education, childcare, things like this, which were really important for women's equality.
Presumably, every time you raise the question of gender-based analysis, you come up against the question of childcare. That has to be a big part of this equation. What would you like to see in the budget on that score?
Well, I think Childcare now has asked for $1 billion in this budget, and to increase the program of spending on childcare so that within 10 years it's up to 1% of GDP. Basically, the message is we need more and we need it faster.
And we've been talking about gender-based, is all about women. Of course, what about men? I've got to ask you that question. What about the question of paternity leave, leave for new fathers? Is that part of this? I mean, we're a gender too.
Absolutely, and having men involved in childcare from an early age is extremely important. I think we've already seen a lot of evidence from men's involvement in birthing and raising a baby spills over into their life. So it's important, absolutely. There's already some important analysis about the fact that the existing parental leave isn't used as fully as it could be. I think over a third of parents, male and female, don't take use of the existing provisions because the eligibility hasn't changed. So they've made the benefits better and they've extended a period of time, but you can't always get them.
Final thing, I suppose that if the government's going to try to undertake this rather large change in the whole way it approaches budgeting, they'd have to do a lot of consultations. Have you seen a lot of consultations? Because I haven't heard about much.
There's been some consultation, definitely. I know our organization, CREA, was invited to a consultation meeting in Toronto, I think just a few days in advance of the meeting. There wasn't a lot of time to prepare. But there is history where there used to be much closer links between women's organizations and the federal government and provincial governments, so that there was more ongoing discussion and communication and ongoing consultation about what should priorities be for women.
Interesting. We'll have to get back to you after the budget and see how they did. Appreciate you coming in. Thanks very much to Jane Stinson. She's with the Canadian Research Institute for the Advancement of Women. Appreciate it.
Welcome.